I want you to picture something for me. You're sitting at a dinner table. It's warm. There are candles. Someone just passed you the bread, and across the table, a woman is laughing, really laughing, the kind that reaches her eyes, and she looks at you and says, "Sweetheart, you are the best thing that ever happened to this family." And you believe her. You believe her because you've been sitting at this table for 8 years. Because she called you when you were sick. Because she drove 45 minutes to help you move boxes when your office relocated. Because she is, by every measure you have ever used to judge a person, one of the warmest, most loving women you have ever met. Now I want you to picture the same woman. Different day. You're not at the dinner table. You're alone in your kitchen on a Tuesday afternoon, laptop open, and your hands have gone completely still, because you are looking at 6 years of bank statements, and you are doing the math, and the math is telling you something that your heart absolutely refuses to accept. $94,312. Gone. And her name is on the account it went to. That is where my story begins. Stay with me. Because I promise you, what I did next, how I handled it, what happened at that harvest dinner table in front of 17 people, it is the kind of ending that you do not see coming, even when I've already told you it's coming. I have told this story a handful of times in my life. Every single time, people sit with their mouths open at the same moment. You'll know it when we get there. My name is Lauren Calloway. I was 34 years old when everything I thought I knew about my marriage, my family, and the people I trusted most in this world turned out to be a carefully constructed lie. And this is the full story. Before I go any further, if this is your first time here, welcome. Hit that subscribe button right now, because we tell stories on this channel that will stay with you. Real drama, real consequences, real endings. And if you've been here before, drop a comment right now. Just say, "I'm here," because I genuinely love knowing who's listening to these. Okay, let's get into it. I need to start by telling you about Sandra, because you cannot understand what she did to me without first understanding how good she was at being someone else entirely. Sandra Calloway, née Prout, was 58 years old when all of this happened. 5'3". Silver hair she wore in a neat, classic style. She favored soft colors, lavender cardigans, cream blouses, and she always smelled faintly of something warm like vanilla or cedar. She was the kind of woman who remembered exactly how everyone in the family took their coffee. She sent actual, handwritten birthday cards, not texts, not e-cards, but physical cards in envelopes with stamps. She kept a recipe box on her kitchen counter that had belonged to her own grandmother, and she would flip through it when she talked to you on the phone, like the conversation and the cooking were all part of the same comfortable rhythm. From the outside, she was the dream mother-in-law. I knew people who rolled their eyes when I talked about her. "You're so lucky," my friend Priya used to say. "My mother-in-law shows up unannounced and reorganizes my pantry." I would laugh. I genuinely thought I was lucky. I met Sandra 6 months into dating her son, Marcus. We drove out to the Calloway farmhouse on a Sunday in early spring, and I will be honest with you, terrified. I'd heard enough mother-in-law horror stories to know that the first meeting was high stakes. But from the moment Sandra opened that farmhouse door, I felt something release in my chest. She took both my hands in hers, looked at me like she was actually seeing me, and said, "Oh, you're exactly what I pictured." And she said it with such warmth that I didn't even stop to ask what she'd pictured, or why she'd been picturing anything at all. That was Sandra's gift. She made you feel so seen, so welcomed, that the small strange things slid right past you. You didn't examine them. Why would you? You were too busy feeling loved. Marcus and I dated for 2 years before he proposed. He was 31 then, I was 28. He was tall, sandy-haired, the kind of handsome that doesn't announce itself. It just settles on you slowly, like you keep noticing it. He worked in commercial real estate. He was funny in a dry, quiet way. He was patient with me when I was anxious about work, and he showed up, consistently, in all the small ways that matter. He brought me soup when I was sick. He remembered that I liked the window seat on planes. He texted me when he knew I was in a difficult meeting, just to say, "You've got this." I loved him. I want to make that absolutely clear. When I said yes to his proposal, on a hiking trail in October, no audience, no elaborate setup, just the two of us and the autumn trees, it was the easiest yes of my life. I was not confused. I was not settling. I was choosing him, completely and deliberately, the same way I chose everything important in my life. We got married 14 months later, in a small ceremony in the valley, and Sandra cried happy tears through the whole thing and held my hand during the photos and called me her daughter for the first time that evening, in a toast that made half the room tear up. I am telling you all of this because I need you to feel what I felt. Because if you don't feel how real it was, how solid and warm and certain it all seemed, then the rest of this story is just facts. And facts alone don't capture it. What happened to me happened inside of something beautiful, and that is what made it so devastating. Marcus and I moved into our first house 6 weeks after the wedding. It was a 3-bedroom craftsman in a neighborhood we'd chosen carefully, good schools for someday, a 10-minute drive to my office, close enough to a trail system that we could hike on weekends. We painted the living room a deep sage green that took us 3 trips to the hardware store to get right. We argued about the kitchen backsplash with the exact amount of passion that only people who love each other and a house simultaneously can manage. We planted a rose bush along the front fence that first spring and stood back and looked at it with the particular satisfaction of people who are building something together. We had agreed before we ever moved in on how we'd handle money. I want to walk you through this carefully because the financial structure of our marriage is where the story really lives, and I want you to understand exactly how it worked and exactly how it was exploited. We both worked. I earned more. I was a financial analyst at a mid-size investment firm, and my salary was solid. Marcus earned less but reliably, and he'd been in commercial real estate long enough to have a stable client base. We had separate personal checking accounts for our individual spending, coffees, clothing, whatever, and a joint savings account that we both contributed to each month. I put in $3,000. He put in $2,000. That account was, we agreed, sacred. It was for the future. A bigger house eventually, or a vacation property, or the kind of emergency fund that would actually cover a real emergency without either of us panicking. Marcus managed the household bills, mortgage, utilities, insurance, because I traveled frequently for work, and it was easier for him to be the one who was home when the plumber showed up or the HVAC needed servicing. This was not unusual. This was not something I thought twice about. Plenty of couples divide responsibilities exactly this way. What I didn't know, what I had absolutely no reason to suspect, was that Marcus had taken that arrangement and quietly turned it into a mechanism. Not all at once. That's the thing about this kind of betrayal. It doesn't arrive as a single dramatic moment. It builds slowly, carefully, incrementally, the same way you'd boil a frog. A small transfer here. A slightly larger one there. Always just below the amount that would have triggered our bank's automatic alert. Always with a plausible explanation attached if anyone had looked. A utility overpayment, a reimbursement, a property tax adjustment. The paper trail, on the surface, looked like normal financial noise. You'd have to sit down and go through 6 years of it, line by line, with the trained eye of someone who does this for a living, to see the pattern underneath. Which is exactly what I eventually did. But we're not there yet. For the first 3 years of our marriage, life was genuinely good. We fell into a rhythm. Weeknights were easy. Whoever got home first started dinner. We ate at the kitchen table more often than not, talked about our days, watched something on TV afterward. Weekends, we hiked or visited friends, or drove out to the farmhouse to see Marcus's parents. We talked about kids vaguely, in the way couples do when it's something they want but aren't quite ready to schedule yet. We talked about Portugal, which had been Marcus's dream trip since college, and which I'd been saving it as a possibility once the account reached a certain level. The account never quite reached that level. There was always a reason. Inflation, Marcus said. The cost of the mortgage refinance. A property tax reassessment that hit harder than expected. I nodded. I accepted these explanations the way you accept a lot of things in a marriage, not because you're foolish, but because you trust the person delivering them, and trust is the agreement you make when you say I do. Sandra was a constant presence in those years, though never an intrusive one. She called every week or two, me directly, not through Marcus, which I always appreciated. She asked about my work, genuinely interested in what I did even though finance was not her world. She sent me articles she thought I'd find interesting, clipped from actual physical magazines she subscribed to. When my father had a health scare in year 3 of our marriage, she sent flowers and called 3 times in the first week just to check in. Tell me, how do you suspect that woman of anything? How do you hold the bank statements in one hand and the birthday cards in the other, and make them belong to the same person? That is the question I sat with for a long time. I still don't have a clean answer. What I have instead is the understanding that the most sophisticated deceptions are not the ones that look like lies. They are the ones that look exactly like love. Okay, pause right here. I know. You want to know about the Tuesday. You want to know about the folder. We're getting there, I promise. But I need you to understand the foundation first, because the ending only lands the way it lands if you felt the full weight of everything that was built on top of that lie. If you're watching this on YouTube, smash that like button right now. It costs you nothing, and it genuinely helps this story reach more people who need to hear it. And drop in the comments, have you ever discovered something that completely reframed your past? Because I'm going to read these later, and I want to know. Okay. Back to Lauren. Year 6 of our marriage. I was 34. I had been promoted twice at my firm and was managing a team of 5 analysts. Marcus had added 2 new commercial clients and seemed, if anything, more settled and content than he'd been in years. The house had a new patio we'd put in the previous summer. The rose bush along the front fence was enormous now, blooming every spring like it had been there forever. I took a half day from work on a Tuesday in early October because I had a dentist appointment that, unknown to me until I arrived at the office that morning, had been rescheduled for the following week. My assistant had gotten the dates mixed up. I was mildly annoyed, thought briefly about going back to the office, decided instead to work from home for the afternoon, and drove back to the house at 11:30 in the morning. Marcus's car was not in the driveway. He was at the office or at a client meeting. I didn't think to check. I made a pot of coffee, opened my laptop at the kitchen table, pulled up my work email, and that's when my phone buzzed. Low balance alert. Joint savings account. Current balance, $1247. I looked at it for a moment. My brain, trained the way it is, immediately began calculating. According to my mental running total, that account should have had somewhere between $38,000 and $42,000 in it, depending on what bills had cleared most recently. We'd been contributing $5,000 combined every month for 6 years. Even accounting for whatever Marcus had drawn for the house expenses, there should have been significant money in there. $1,247. I told myself there had to be an explanation. A large payment I'd forgotten about. A system glitch. Something. I set down my coffee and opened the online banking portal. I pulled up the full statement history for the joint account. And I started reading. I want to try to describe what it's like to realize something like this in real time, because it didn't happen all at once. It happened in stages, like layers of a photograph developing. First I saw the recent balance and thought, that's wrong. Then I scrolled back a month and saw a transfer for $900 to an account number I didn't recognize, and I thought, that's odd. Then I scrolled back further and saw another transfer, and another, and I thought, wait. And then I opened a spreadsheet, because I am who I am, and I started documenting every transfer to that account number, month by month, going back as far as the records would show. It took 2 hours. The kitchen got dark around me as a cloud passed over the sun. My coffee went cold. I didn't move except to type. When I added the final number, I checked it twice. Then I did the math by hand on a notepad, the way my father taught me when I was 12 years old. Never trust a single method when the stakes are high. Both methods gave me the same answer. $94,312. Transferred incrementally over 74 months to an account I had never seen, never authorized, and never been told about. I closed the spreadsheet. I sat very still. I am not a woman who panics. I have managed market crises from a trading floor at 2 in the morning. I have delivered bad news to clients who did not want to hear it. I know how to keep my face neutral and my breathing steady when everything around me is falling apart. That training kicked in now, and I am genuinely grateful for it, because without it, I might have done something that would have cost me everything. Instead, I picked up my phone. I searched the account number. It took time. Public record searches are not designed to be fast or easy. But I had professional access to financial database systems through my work credentials. And after 40 minutes and 3 different database queries, I had what I needed. The account was held jointly under 2 names: Marcus Allen Calloway, Sandra Jean Calloway. I read it 3 times. Then I put my phone face down on the table, walked to the sink, poured a glass of water, drank it standing up, looking out the window at the backyard, at the spot where we'd talked about putting a garden. My reflection in the window glass looked perfectly ordinary. Just a woman standing at a sink in the afternoon light. Nothing about my face showed what was happening inside. What was happening inside was this. 8 years of memories were being rerun through a new filter, and everything was coming out differently on the other side. Every time Sandra had called to check in, now I was thinking, was she checking what I knew? Every time Marcus had given me an explanation for their account balance, now I was thinking, how long had he been rehearsing those explanations? Every hug, every sweetheart, every birthday card, every warm, laughing, lavender cardigan moment. A performance. All of it. A careful, sustained 8-year performance. I stood at that sink for a long time. And somewhere in the cold quiet of it, I made a decision. I was not going to cry. Not yet. Not where anyone could see it. I was going to be smarter than both of them. Marcus came home that evening at 6:15. I had made dinner. Pasta, his favorite, with the sauce he liked from the recipe I'd adapted over the years. The kitchen smelled right. The table was set the way it always was. I poured his wine and asked about his day, and listened to him talk about a client negotiation that was dragging on, and I nodded and said the right things, and he had absolutely no idea that anything had changed. I am not proud of how easy it was for me to sit across from him and feel nothing show on my face. But I am also not ashamed of it. He had been doing the same thing to me for 6 years. I was simply returning the gesture, for the first time, and only for 3 weeks. The next morning, as soon as Marcus left, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to my financial institution's legal records department. I requested certified copies of 6 years of statements for both my personal and joint accounts. I gave them my professional credentials to expedite the request and paid the processing fee by card. They told me the documents would be ready within 5 business days. The second call was to a lawyer named Diane Hurst, who had been recommended to me 2 years earlier by a colleague whose sister had gone through a divorce. I'd filed the name away and never expected to need it. I needed it now. Diane's assistant got me an appointment for the following afternoon. Diane was small and very still in the way that sharp people often are. She listened to me lay out the entire situation in about 20 minutes without interrupting once, her pen moving steadily over a notepad. When I finished, she looked up and said, "You work in finance?" "Yes." "So you understand exactly what you're looking at?" "I do." "Good," she said, with a kind of satisfaction that I found instantly reassuring. "That's going to help us." She walked me through what the documentation would support under state law. What constituted marital asset fraud? What a reasonable outcome looked like in a divorce proceeding with this level of documented evidence. She also told me, very clearly, to do 3 things immediately. Do not confront Marcus or Sandra until I had copies of all relevant documents in hand. Open a personal account in my name only and redirect my paycheck there, beginning with the next pay cycle. And do not, under any circumstances, access the joint account or make any transfers until she told me I could. I did all 3 things within 24 hours. For the next 3 weeks, I lived inside a kind of controlled silence that I don't have a perfect word for. I went to work. I managed my team. I attended a conference in Chicago for 2 days and delivered a presentation that received excellent feedback. I came home to Marcus every evening and made dinner or ordered food, and sat across from him in the lamplight and talked about ordinary things. He was attentive during those weeks, unusually so. He bought me flowers twice for no stated reason. He suggested the Portugal trip again with more specific enthusiasm than he'd ever shown before, looking up flights one evening on his laptop and turning the screen to show me options. I looked at the flight prices, smiled, said that looked wonderful. Meanwhile, Diane was reviewing my documents. My certified statements arrived on the 7th day. I made 3 copies, kept one at Diane's office, put one in a safety deposit box I opened at a branch across town, and kept one at home, hidden in a box of old work files in the back of the closet. I also began building what Diane and I started calling the folder. The complete financial record of the fraudulent transfers, organized chronologically, with a legal summary page at the front that Diane drafted outlining the key findings in plain language that anyone, including someone with no financial background, could read and understand within 5 minutes. The folder was 19 pages. It was clean, organized, and absolutely devastating. Sandra called me twice during those 3 weeks. The first time was to ask about a stuffing recipe I'd mentioned the previous Thanksgiving. We talked for 12 minutes. She was warm and funny, and asked about a project I'd mentioned at our last dinner. I told her how it had resolved. She said she was so proud of me. I said thank you, and I meant nothing, and my voice didn't crack once. The second call was just to chat. She said she'd been thinking of me. She asked if I was sleeping okay, because I'd seemed a little tired at the last family gathering. I said I was fine, just a busy season at work. She said to make sure I was taking care of myself. She said Marcus was lucky to have someone so dedicated. I thanked her. I hung up. I sat in the quiet for a moment. Then I went back to building the folder. There was one more thing I did in those 3 weeks that I haven't mentioned yet, because it felt the most personal. I wrote a letter. Not to Marcus. Not to Sandra. To Richard, Marcus's father. A single handwritten page, addressed to him personally, slipped inside the front cover of the folder. It said simply, "Richard, I'm sorry to do this at the table. I didn't know a better way. I wanted you to see it in person with everyone present because I knew it was the only way they couldn't explain it away or get ahead of it before the truth was out. I want you to know I don't believe you knew, and I'm sorry. You deserved a better version of this than what you're about to get." I sealed it with a small piece of tape and wrote his name on it in my neatest handwriting. Then I put the folder in my bag, and I waited for the last Saturday of October. Okay. We are so close. We are literally one dinner party away from the moment you've been waiting for since the first 30 seconds of this story. Before I take you in that farmhouse door, please, if you are not subscribed, do it right now. I post new stories every single week, and if you're new here, I don't want you to miss what comes next week either. And one more thing, in the comments, I want to know, would you have waited 3 weeks or would you have confronted him the same night? There is no wrong answer. I want to know what you would have done. Okay. The harvest dinner. Here we go. The last Saturday of October was cool and clear. The kind of fall day that feels almost too perfect, like it's been designed by someone who wanted a beautiful backdrop for something important. The leaves were peak color. The drive out to the Callaway farmhouse took 40 minutes on back roads that looked like a painting. Marcus drove. He was in a good mood. He'd gotten positive news on the client negotiation that week, and he was talking about it as we drove, relaxed and easy, one hand on the wheel, the other on the center console between us. I rested my hand near his, not quite touching. I watched the trees go by. The folder was in my bag on the back seat. 19 pages, Diane's legal summary on top, Richard's letter tucked inside the front cover. I had checked it that morning and again before we left the house. It was there. It was ready. The farmhouse was already full when we arrived. Marcus's parents' cars were in the driveway, alongside his aunt and uncle's minivan and his cousin Derek's truck. Through the kitchen window, I could see movement. Sandra moving between the stove and the counter, with the efficiency of someone who had hosted this dinner 30 times, which she had. The smell reached us before we even got to the door. Roasted squash, warm bread, something with rosemary and garlic that made the whole front porch feel like an embrace. Richard opened the door. He was 62, tall like Marcus, with the kind of face that had aged well, deep-set eyes, an easy smile, the weathered look of a man who'd spent decades working with his hands even after his career had moved him indoors. He shook my hand the way he always did, both hands firm, warm. "Lauren, so good to see you." And he meant it. Richard always meant it. I smiled. "Good to see you, Richard." We went in. I hugged aunts. I crouched down to say hello to Kelsey's kids, who were 7 and 4, and immediately wanted to show me something in the backyard. I let them lead me out for 5 minutes and admired whatever they were showing me. A a frog they'd found, I think, and felt the whole time like I was watching myself from slightly above, calm and clear and separate from everything around me. Sandra found me when I came back inside. She was wearing a soft burgundy blouse, and her silver hair was pinned back, and she looked, I'll say it, beautiful. She always did. She took both my hands and kissed my cheek and said, "You look wonderful, sweetheart. That color is perfect on you." I was wearing a dark navy dress. I had chosen it deliberately. "Thank you, Sandra," I said. "Everything smells incredible." She beamed. Dinner was served at 6. The long table in the farmhouse dining room seated 22 that night, 17 adults and 5 children at the small side table nearby. Richard sat at the head. Sandra to his left. Marcus and I sat next to each other, across from Kelsey and her husband Dan. Marcus's Aunt Alina sat to my right, and she spent most of the first hour talking to me about a garden renovation she was planning, which I listened to with what I believe was genuine warmth, because I like Alina. The food was, as always, extraordinary. There was a moment, maybe midway through the main course, when I looked down the table at all those faces, laughing, talking, reaching across each other for the bread or the gravy, and I felt something. A wave of something that wasn't quite sadness and wasn't quite anger. More like grief, maybe. Grief for the version of this that I'd believed in. Because whatever happened tonight, this table would never be the same. This family would never be the same. I sat with that feeling for a moment. Then I let it go. It had earned itself by being real. But it had no place in what I needed to do next. We were between the main course and dessert. Sandra had gotten up to start bringing out the pies. Richard was refilling wine. The conversation had settled into that comfortable, cross-stable hum that means everyone is warm and full and happy. I reached into my bag. I felt the folder before I saw it. The heft of 19 pages in a manila folder. I pulled it out slowly, set it in my lap for a moment. Looked at it. Then I placed it on the table, in the center, between the gravy boat and the candles. The movement was quiet. No one noticed immediately. Then Marcus turned and looked down. He saw the folder. He had no reason to know exactly what it was. But something in him knew. I watched the color leave his face, in a way I have never seen happen to a person before. A literal draining, like water from a tub. His jaw tightened. He said my name. Very quietly. "Lauren." "Richard," I said, not looking at Marcus. I kept my voice completely even, the way Diane and I had rehearsed it in my head a dozen times. "I need you to take a look at something." I slid the folder down the table to him. Slowly. Deliberately. The conversation didn't stop all at once. Annalena was mid-sentence. A cousin across the table was laughing at something his wife had said. But the movement of the folder was enough, that particular sliding motion in the middle of a dinner table, and one by one, like lights going out, the conversation stopped. Sandra had been on her way back from the kitchen with the first pie. She stopped in the doorway. She saw the folder in Richard's hands. I watched her face change, not dramatically, not with crying or shock, but in the way a very controlled person's face changes when they realize the ground is moving under their feet. A subtle, terrible stillness. "Lauren," Marcus said again, louder this time. His hand moved toward the folder. "Don't," I said, still not looking at him. Still looking at Richard. "Let him read it." Marcus's hand stopped. Richard opened the folder. He read Diane's legal summary first, the one-page overview written in plain language. I watched his eyes move across the lines. His expression didn't change during the first paragraph. By the second paragraph, a small line had appeared between his brows. By the third, he turned to the statement copies and began reading those. He turned each page carefully, the way people do when they're trying to make sure they understand something completely before they react to it. The table was silent. 17 adults. Not one sound except the distant noise of the children at the side table, oblivious and cheerful. Sandra moved. She came around the table toward Richard, not quickly, but steadily, the way a person moves when they're trying to intercept something before it lands. She said, "Richard, let me." "Sit down, Sandra." His voice was quiet. Completely quiet. Not raised at all. But she stopped moving as if he'd put a hand on her shoulder. And she sat. He kept reading. 4 minutes. I know because I was counting, In the back of my mind, the way I count things when I need to stay calm. 4 minutes and 12 seconds from when he opened the folder to when he set the last page down and looked up. He didn't look at me. He looked at his wife. And what was in his face, I have tried many times to find the right word for it. It wasn't anger, though anger was there. It wasn't shock, though shock was there too. It was something older than both of those. Something that looked, more than anything, like the specific pain of a person who has just discovered that something they built their whole life on was not what they believed. Sandra opened her mouth. What she said, I don't know exactly. It was something that started with "it's not," and didn't get to finish because Marcus stood up, chair scraping back, and reached across the table for the folder, and that's when the table came apart. Kelsey's husband Dan said something sharp. Kelsey pulled her chair back. One of the ants made a sound. Marcus got his hand on the folder, and I put my hand over his, and I looked at him. I looked at him directly, for the first time that evening, really looked at him, and I said, calmly and clearly, "There are 3 other copies in 3 different locations. Diane has one." He let go. What followed was loud and chaotic, in the way that only a large, close family falling apart in real time can be. Sandra was crying, real crying, I think, though I was past the point of being able to evaluate what was real from her. Richard was on his feet. He and Sandra were speaking in the low, terrible way that long-married people speak to each other when the fight is too big for volume. Kelsey had taken her kids out of the room. Marcus was standing at the end of the table saying my name, over and over, like if he said it enough times I would turn back into the person who hadn't just done this. I stood up. I straightened my dress. I picked up my bag. I looked at Marcus one last time. He looked, I want to be precise here. He looked like someone who had just realized that the woman he had underestimated for 8 years had been paying much closer attention than he knew. I said, "Diane will be in touch Monday morning." Then I walked out of the farmhouse, down the porch steps, across the gravel drive, got in the car, my car, which I had driven separately, something Diane had quietly suggested I do, and I sat for a moment in the quiet of it, with the fall dark all around me and the faint sound of the farmhouse through the walls. Then I turned the key, drove home, alone, in the dark, no music, no podcasts, just the road. The next 48 hours were the strangest of my life. Marcus came home that night late. I was in bed, not sleeping. He stood in the doorway of the bedroom for a long moment. Then he went to the guest room. Neither of us said anything. In the morning, he tried. He sat down at the kitchen table while I was making coffee, and he said, and I have to give him a reluctant kind of credit for at least attempting this. He said, "I know there's nothing I can say right now that's going to fix this, but I need you to know that I was going to tell you." I poured my coffee. I didn't respond. "She needed help," he said. "My mother needed help, Lauren. There were things going on with my parents' finances that my father didn't know about, and she was panicking, and I didn't know how to tell you. I kept thinking I'd pay it back before you noticed, and it just..." He stopped. I turned around. I looked at him. He looked exhausted, which I suppose he deserved. "Marcus," I said, "you took $94,000 from our joint account over 6 years in carefully structured transfers designed to avoid triggering alerts, and you routed them to an account held in your name and your mother's. I work in finance. I know what that structure looks like. It did not look like a man who panicked and made a mistake. It looked like a plan." He didn't have an answer for that. I finished my coffee and called Diane. The divorce proceedings took 11 months. Marcus did not fight them aggressively, which his lawyer probably advised against, but which I suspect was also because he knew, by the time we got to discovery, that there was nothing to fight with. The documentation was complete. The pattern was clear. The account was in his name. Diane was very good at her job, and I was very well prepared, and the outcome reflected both of those things. I won't give you a number because this isn't about numbers, not really. What I'll say is that I walked away with my half of everything that had actually been ours, plus the corrected accounting of what had been taken, minus what Marcus could realistically return given that a significant portion of it had been spent. It was not everything. It never is. But it was enough. It was more than he had intended me to have, which is a form of justice, even if it is not a perfect one. Sandra and Richard separated by December. I heard this through Kelsey, who texted me once in January, a message that said only, "I believe you. I'm sorry I didn't ask questions earlier." I wrote back, "Thank you, that means something." We haven't spoken since, but I mean it, it did mean something. I moved into an apartment in February. First floor, small garden space in back, good light in the kitchen. I planted tomatoes that first spring, and they were magnificent. I opened a savings account, just mine, and I funded it every month the way I always had. And I checked the balance every single time and felt something that I can only describe as the clean satisfaction of a person who has reclaimed her own story. I have been asked many times if I regret how I did it. The public nature of it. The harvest dinner. The 17 people. Here's my answer. I thought very carefully about the alternatives. I could have confronted Marcus privately. He would have had time to prepare, to call Sandra, to get ahead of the story, to construct a version of events that made me look unstable or vindictive. I could have filed the divorce papers quietly and let it all happen through lawyers. But Sandra would have remained exactly who she was in that family, the warm, silver-haired matriarch who everyone adored, and Marcus would have been the victim of a divorce that no one quite understood. The people who knew them would have kept knowing them the same way, and I would have carried the truth alone. I chose the dinner because it was the only venue where the truth would land with witnesses who could not look away, where Richard would see it firsthand, where Marcus and Sandra would have no time to coordinate their response before the people who mattered most to them had already seen the documentation. Was it dramatic? Yes. Was it a hard thing to do in that room, in front of all those people, knowing what it would cost everyone there, including people who were innocent? Also yes. But it was true. And it was documented. And it was mine to decide. I chose to tell the truth in a room full of people who deserved to know it. I would make the same choice again. I'm 36 now. It has been 2 years since the harvest dinner, and what I feel most often, when I think about that night, is not anger. It's not even sadness anymore, most of the time. What I feel is a kind of clarity that I don't think I would have arrived at any other way. I know things now that I didn't know at 28 when I sat across from Sandra and believed completely that she loved me. I know that warmth can be a strategy. I know that trust is not the same thing as due diligence, and that loving someone well does not require suspending your own judgment. I know that the most dangerous lie is not the one that looks like a lie. It's the one that looks exactly like what you most want to be true. I also know that I am more resilient than I realized. I know that I can sit at a dinner table and say, with a steady voice and a steady hand, "Here is the truth," and then walk out into the dark and drive home alone and be okay. More than okay. I know that I am capable of that. I have a good life now. It is smaller, in some ways, than the one I thought I was building. One apartment, not a house. No rosebush. No Portugal trips planned. But it is entirely, completely, authentically mine. Every piece of it. I know exactly where every dollar is. I know exactly who I am trusting and why. I know what I will and won't accept. And every October, the last Saturday of the month, I make myself a good dinner. Something I enjoy. I pour a glass of wine. The good one, the one I don't save for special occasions anymore, because I've stopped saving things for someday. I sit at my own table, in my own quiet apartment, and I look out at my own garden, and I am at peace. Not the manufactured peace of someone who has decided to pretend something doesn't hurt. The real kind. The kind that comes from having faced the thing and dealt with it and walked out the other side still standing. That kind of peace is worth everything it cost. And if you are sitting somewhere right now, carrying the weight of something similar, a trust that was broken, a person who was not who you thought they were, a future that turned out to be built on something hollow, I want you to hear this. The truth does not need to be performed. It does not need to be dramatic. It does not need a dinner table with 17 witnesses. But it does need to be told. In whatever way makes sense for your situation. Because carrying someone else's lie as if it were your secret is one of the heaviest things a person can do, and you are not required to carry it. Set it down. On a table if you have to. Then walk out into the dark. You'll be okay. That is Lauren's story. And I don't know about you, but I need a minute after that one. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something, made you think, Made you want to call someone you trust and tell them you love them? Please share it. Send it to someone who needs to hear it. That is genuinely the best thing you can do for this channel and for stories like this one. If you want to talk about it, and I really mean this, leave a comment. Tell me what part hit you hardest. Tell me what you would have done at that dinner table. Tell me if you've ever been in a situation where you had to choose between confronting the truth privately and exposing it publicly. I read every comment. I respond to as many as I can. These conversations are the reason I keep telling stories. If you are new here, welcome. And please subscribe. New stories go up every week. Some of them are about betrayal like this one. Some are about redemption. Some are about the kind of quiet courage that doesn't get celebrated because no one was there to see it. All of them are worth your time, and I am very glad you're here. One last thing. Lauren wanted me to end with this. She said, tell them the rose bush is still at the old house. Marcus kept it. I drove past once and it was blooming, and I felt, she paused. I felt like it was just a rose bush, and that was fine. That's it. That's the whole thing. Take care of yourselves. I'll see you next week.